Alrighty. So tonight's presentation is a visit with Connecticut state historian. And our Connecticut state historian is Walter Woodward, and he's going to help us understand how people and events in Connecticut's past played crucial roles in forming the culture and character of Connecticut today. So Walter is a gifted storyteller, and he's also the author of Creating Connecticut, Critical Moments That Shaped a Great State. This is that book I was referring to earlier. That book brings to life the history that we thought we knew, from the nearly forgotten early presence of the Dutch to the time when Connecticut was New England's fiercest prosecutor of witches. And that was before Salem, you folks. There were decades when nutmeggers were rapidly leaving the state, and then the years when Irish immigrants were hurrying into it. So Walter is going to leave us thinking about our state in a whole new way. And just a little bit more about Walter Woodward. He is as I said before, the state historian of Connecticut, and he is an associate professor of history at the University of Connecticut. He is the narrator and producer of Today in Connecticut History, and that's with the Connecticut Humanities, and also Grading the Nutmeg. That's the podcast of Connecticut history. That's with Connecticut Explored magazine. There's a theme here, Connecticut, Connecticut. It's all about
My
Connecticut.
job.
Walter's book, Prospera's America, John Winthrop Jr., Alchemy and the Creation of New England Culture, 1606 to 1676, won the Homer D. Babbage Award for Best Book in Connecticut History from the Association for Connecticut History. He also writes From the State Historian column in Connecticut Explored. And Woodward is widely sought after as a public speaker and historian. That's why we got him here. And he lives in Columbia, Connecticut, but he's here with us tonight in Granby, Connecticut. And so, Walter, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I am going to turn over the reins of the presentation to you, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Holly. It's really nice to be here. And thank you so much for coming out. You are my social life these days. I tell everyone that all my friends are two-dimensional now, and that my life support system is Jeff Bezos. So it's come to that. And it's really nice to have a chance to come and talk about, especially this book. I worked very hard to make this a particular kind of book. And when I got done with it, I was thinking, I gave a lot of thought to how I was going to introduce it to people, because communicating what this book was about was really important to me. And I thought back to my very first class as a graduate student many years ago, when I went in, all excited, I'm going to be a professional historian. And suddenly I'm drinking history out of a fire hose. It's a book for every class every week. And you got so much more to read than you can do. But I was so excited to come in and prove that I could be a historian. And I had a very dour, distinguished, he's formally one of UConn's distinguished professors. His name is Richard D. Brown. And we went into this first class, and the first question I was ever asked as a graduate student was this one, why did the author write this book? And I have to admit, I was completely nonplussed when I heard it, because I thought a lot about the book, but not in that way. Well, we spent 3 hours that night and 3 hours for, each of the next 15 weeks unpacking books, starting with that as the essential question. Why did the author write this book? By the end of that semester, it was really clear to me how important that question is. What is it about a topic that makes an author think it's worth, several years of his or her life to get it down on paper? And then why are they brash enough to think that it's worth several hours or days or weeks of your life to absorb the content of it? So I decided that is how I would begin my introduction of this book. And with your permission, what I'm going to do is share the screen now. And can everyone see the book cover on a blue background?
Absolutely, Walter. It looks
Excellent.
beautiful.
Thank you, Holly. Okay. So now I would like to tell you formally why I wrote this book. As Connecticut state historian, I've had the good fortune to spend my career focusing my historical research on this state, its people, and their stories. Creating Connecticut is a product of that effort. It's a collection of 24 stories, 12 shorter, 12 longer, each of which tells us something important about Connecticut's past, something that still, in one way or another, affects our lives as Connecticutans today. All of them are designed to be readable, engaging, and informative introductions to aspects of our state's history that will be new or nearly so to most readers. Some of the stories in Creating Connecticut show people we thought we knew, Mark Twain, Nathan Hale, in new and surprising ways. Some tell us about people many of us don't know, Eleazar Wheelock, Samson Occam, Adrian Block, but maybe we ought to. Many of the stories are about movements, events, and periods of change. The Pequot War, the Hartford Witch Hunt, outmigration to Connecticut's Western Reserve, Irish immigration into the state, crucial moments when Connecticutans were tested and called on by circumstance to change their minds, values, approaches, and even lives, times very much like the one we're living through right now. And some are about the uniqueness of our state and the ways in which Connecticutans have celebrated their past in the past. The focus here is on stories that both interest and matter. Now, you can read them from front to back. They're arranged more or less in chronological order, or you can scan the table of contents and jump in with the story that seems most interesting to you. My hope is that you'll read them all and come away with a desire to know more about Connecticut history. So that's why I wrote this book. And what I'd like to do with the rest of my talk is read passages from a few of the stories in Creating Connecticut. And then I'll answer any questions you may have. And after I've done, I will tell you how you can get your own signed copy of this rare literary gem. That's what my wife calls it. And I'll begin with a reading from Creating Connecticut's first story about Connecticut's restless beginnings and the 50 years of conflict between the Dutch and the English and the indigenous people of this state, a restless era that is today an all but forgotten part of our history. It begins on a day in April in the year 1614. In the spring of 1614, Adrian Block sailed the little ship he had built and named Onrust, Restlessness, into the river the Algonquians called Connecticut, or the place of the long water. The 47-year-old Dutchman was as restless as his vessel and anxious to make up the losses he had experienced the previous winter when his ship Tiger had accidentally burned to the waterline at Manhattan. The trader and explorer was anxious too to secure the Dutch government's recent promise of a trading monopoly over any new countries or harbors discovered by Dutch explorers. Restless to turn his fortunes around, Block came up a river that was itself restless, running fresh and full of upriver snowmelt and spring rain. He named the river the Versha, meaning fresh, as in fast running. And as the first known European to probe its courses and seek its opportunities, he launched an era of restlessness that would change this river and its people forever. Then as now, restless had many meanings, and all would apply to the world the arrival of this little boat would create. A generation of restless Europeans, both Dutch and English, constantly in motion, never ceasing or pausing, would come to the Connecticut, the place of the long water, first in search of trade with the indigenous people, and soon after in quest of those people's lands and resources. Some of them were spiritually restless, troubled in mind and in soul, and seeking a place to serve their God as their consciences demanded. For the Native Americans already here, The arrival of the onrust heralded a new restlessness, first as they jostled to control distribution of European trade goods, and later as they fought the incoming insurgents' efforts to take their lands and control their lives. For Connecticut's first peoples, the arrival of the onrust brought centuries of restlessness, literal unrest, sleepless worry, sickness, turmoil, and death. Time is the acid rain of historical memory. Slowly, often over generations, stretching into centuries, important details of the past can fade one by one until what was once crucial to the life of a time and people is all but forgotten. So it has been with the Dutch history of Connecticut. Most school children are still taught that the first European to come to Connecticut was Adrian Block. And many students of Hartford history know the Dutch had a trading house there, somewhere close to the later site of Samuel Colt's arms manufacturing complex. But for the average Connecticut, that's the sum of it. The English arrived and the Dutch faded to black. The rest of the colonial story, as they remember it, is a simplistic tale of English versus Indians that quickly morphs into one about patriots versus Tories. But that's not how it was. For its first 50 years, Connecticut was a restless, seething site of constant competition, pitting nation against nation, tribe against tribe, and colonies against colonies in a Rubik's Cube of combinations that always involved the Dutch. Nothing was done by the English at Connecticut without first calculating the Dutch response in New Netherland or at the States General, the seat of government in The Hague. No English settlement was expanded, no tribal alliance contracted, no trading venture launched without calculating the Dutch reaction. The Dutch Connecticut story was a deeply conflicted, sometimes harrowing experience. Those who lived in that time knew their lives depended on knowing it in great detail. Now, I go on in the chapter to highlight the nearly continuous state of conflict between the various English plantations, Dutch authorities, and Indian communities, and the shifting alliances that made life a restless and fearful struggle for everyone in Connecticut's first half century. It was a restless era that set the stage for much that came after, including Connecticut's unique history of witch hunting. In another chapter, I try to answer some of the questions that history brings up. Connecticut's record in handling witchcraft cases raises many questions. Some are unique to Connecticut, some apply to all witch hunts. Why, for example, in the early years of witch hunting, 1647 to 1663, was Connecticut New England's fiercest prosecutor of witches? Why did it switch from being the region's greatest witch killer to the colony that ended executions permanently a generation before Salem? Why did people even believe in witchcraft? What exactly did people think witches could do? And why did it scare them? Why were most witches women? And what made someone who had been a neighbor for many years suddenly so dangerous that community safety made executing them mandatory? Now, the answer to those questions began not in Connecticut, but in Europe. And in the chapter, I trace the Renaissance history of witch hunting. I explain the magical view of the world that made such hunts possible. And I discuss the English witch hunts that were peaking when the Puritans emigrated to Connecticut. The Puritans who came to New England in the early decades of the 1600s carried their fear of the devil and his minions to New England, along with their Bible, clothing, and seed stock. England's greatest witch hunt took place between 1644 and 1647 in the Puritan counties of East Anglia. There, a man named Matthew Hopkins, who styled himself England's witchfinder general, led a witch hunt that resulted in many executions. Some claim as many as 300. Now, the East Anglian location of Hopkins' witch hunt is significant. It's the place from which many of Connecticut's early settlers emigrated. They knew much about, and some had direct connections to, the Hopkins trials. Many must have feared that if the devil was assaulting the English Puritans that furiously in East Anglia, it was only a matter of time until he would find his way to New England. So it's not surprising, perhaps, that New England's first execution for witchcraft took place in 1647, just as the witch hunt in England was winding down. Now, perhaps the most interesting thing about this first New England witch death is that we wouldn't know anything about it except for two sentences that appeared in two different documents produced 100 miles away from each other and found some 250 years apart. Sometime between March and May of 1647, Massachusetts Governor John Winthrop, whose History Journal of New England is one of our most important historical sources from this time, wrote in that journal the following sentence: "One blank of Windsor arraigned and executed at Hartford for a witch." Now, Winthrop left the blank space, intending, no doubt, to add the witch's name once he had received further information. But for the next 257 years, that's all that was known. Some person who lived in Windsor was tried for witchcraft in Hartford and then executed. What was she charged with? Who conducted the trial? Who testified against her? What was her defense? Where was she hanged? None of this was known. In truth, historians didn't even know whether New England's first convicted witch was a man or a woman. Then, in 1904, Annie Elliott Trumbull, daughter of Connecticut's first state librarian, announced that she had come into possession of a little old volume with a worn sheepskin binding that contained the manuscript diary of Matthew Grant, a resident of Windsor from 1635 to 1681. In it, she reported, she had found a Grant-penned entry stating that on May 26, 1647, Alice Young was hanged. Finally, after 2.5 centuries, it was confirmed that New England's first executed witch was, as supposed, a woman, and that her name was Alice Young. That remains most of what is known for certain about her, though historian Richard Ross has recently argued that Alice emigrated to Windsor from London in 1640, which may have put her culturally at odds with her Windsor neighbors, most of whom had emigrated from the English West Country. These cultural differences made her an outsider, he speculates, which, when combined with an epidemic of deadly influenza that hit Windsor the year Young was executed, may have factored in her being singled out for prosecution. Now, the chapter goes on to detail Connecticut's record as early New England's fiercest prosecutor of witchcraft, and how one man, Governor John Winthrop Jr., himself an alchemist and magic practitioner, intervened to bring witch executions in Connecticut to an end. It's a powerful story, I think, with a message as important as any from the better-known Salem trials, and I think you might enjoy it. For the past decade, many Connecticutans, and especially our younger generation, have left our state to seek their fortunes elsewhere. This is truly troublesome, but it's not the first time it's happened. In another chapter, I tell the story of the great outflux of young Connecticutans in the early 1800s as the dream or necessity of finding a better life took them to a part of Ohio known as the Connecticut Western Reserve. Here are a few passages that talk about their journeys west and their feelings about leaving. Connecticut in the early 19th century, as in the 21st century, was hemorrhaging its young people, the lifeblood of its future, to other more economically attractive locations. And it had been doing so for a long time. Although they dispersed to sites both far and near, one area in particular proved the most powerful magnet for Connecticut expatriates, This was the part of Northeast Ohio stretching 120 miles west from the Pennsylvania border, a place many people called New Connecticut, but which was also known and is still today called Connecticut's Western Reserve. This was a part of its original charter territory that Connecticut reserved ownership of when it ceded the remainder of its charter lands to the newly formed United States in 1786. The journey west was both long and hard, between 500 and 650 miles, depending on the route selected and the destination. Road conditions ranged from very bad to deplorable for most of the journey. In heavy rains, roads became mud pits and streams impassable. In some low-lying or wetland areas, efforts were made to ameliorate the muddy conditions by building corduroy roads of logs placed perpendicular to the direction of travel. These provided their own unique kind of jarring discomfort. It was an experience no traveler would ever forget. In addition to the considerable physical dangers of traveling bad roads, fording swelled streams and rivers, and climbing and descending high mountain passes, migrants commonly experienced inhospitable treatment at overcrowded and often squalid inns and taverns. They slept fitfully among strangers, ate bad food with rowdy, drunken, and sometimes dangerous fellow migrants, and they fought off both homesickness and fear of the unknown. How did all these migrants feel about pulling up roots and leaving their native state? Some undoubtedly felt a pioneer's excitement at facing a world that was all possibility. Others, perhaps younger sons not in line to inherit family farms, seethed with resentment about being forced into exile. And some, it is clear, saw having to leave Connecticut for the West as a sign of shame, a visible symbol that they were the expendable ones. How else can we explain Margaret Van Horn Dwight's comment on day 2 of her journey west? The country we pass through till we are beyond New York, I need not describe to you, nor indeed could I, for I am attended by a very unpleasant companion, though not uncommon companion, one to whom I have bowed in subjection ever since I left you. Pride. It has entirely prevented me seeing the country, lest I should be known. And so I suppose it will attend me to the mountains. Then I'm sure it will bid me adieu. Hiding in the wagon so she wouldn't be recognized. This is an aspect of outmigration we rarely encounter or even think about. But once we do, it truly complicates our long-standing views of Anglos hot in the pursuit of manifest destiny. Surely, Connecticutans left their state with mixed emotions. But even as, excuse me, but even as young Connecticutans were moving out of the state, others were moving in. Connecticut had found its future in harnessing its abundant water power to drive the factories of the Industrial Revolution, and that created an unprecedented need for workers to build a new kind of infrastructure. The Irish in Connecticut chapter covers nearly 350 years of the Irish story here. But tonight I'd like to present 3 snapshots. One of what it was like for the Irish who arrived in Connecticut in the years just before the potato famine of the mid-1840s, and then jump ahead a half century to what life was like for the children and grandchildren of those migrants 50 years later. And finally, just take a quick glimpse of what it means to be an Irish Connecticut today. Enter the Irish. To meet the need for laborers, contractors for the Farmington Canal brought in 28 gangs of Irish canal workers called navvies from Galway and Cork. Hartford brought in 400 Irishmen for the Enfield Canal project. Life for the navvies was hellish. Like the Irish railroad track workers who soon followed them, they dug furiously sun up to sunset, goaded by overseer contractors whose profits depended on how much labor they could extract every day. Eyewitnesses marveled at the physical prowess of the Irishmen as they ran full wheelbarrows up narrow planks from ditches 20 feet deep. They lived in temporary shanty camps where overcrowding, poor sanitation, and stagnant water made disease a constant. Alcohol was woven into a workday marked by short bursts of furious digging, followed by a trip to the whiskey barrel and a dram from the jigger boss. Irish workers were paid only for the days weather and their health let them work, and they earned just 75 cents a day, one-third less than native-born laborers. The navvies represented Connecticut's first major influx of practicing Irish Catholics, and the descendants of Connecticut's Puritan founders didn't like that one bit. Connecticut had no resident priests, and the Yankees made it clear that that would be just fine with them if they kept it that way. When Reverend John Powers of New York requested permission to celebrate Mass for canal workers at New Haven's Protestant Seamen's Chapel on Long Wharf, he was told, "We have no popery in New Haven, and we don't want any." Despite this overt intolerance, popery did come to Connecticut, at first through the services of an itinerant priest from Rhode Island, who in 1828 conducted house masses on the east bank of the river in Hartford. The following year, Hartford became home to Most Holy Trinity, Connecticut's first Catholic church. The newspaper, the Connecticut Observer, was simply aghast. How will it read in history that in 1829, Hartford in the state of Connecticut was made the center of a Roman Catholic mission? Well, that's the beginning. Let's jump ahead 50 years and see how things are going for the children and the grandchildren of these first comers. Unlike their fathers, by 1900, 2/3 of second-generation Irish men worked in skilled trades or higher, with economic security mirroring that of the Connecticut Yankees. Irish American men dominated police and fire departments and monopolized the building trades. And while 90% of their mothers remained domestic servants, second-generation Irish American daughters rose to become clerks, skilled factory workers, teachers, and union organizers too. Better jobs came in large part because of high Irish involvement in Connecticut's labor movement. Irish Americans made up most of many unions' membership and their leadership. So now let's jump forward another half century, or actually another century, and see what it's like to be Irish in Connecticut today. To be Irish in Connecticut today is, for those lucky enough to claim Irish American ancestry, a source of both identity and pride, underscored by an extraordinary long-term record of achievement in politics, law, public safety, commerce, industry, and culture. The fact that such achievements were made by a people once reviled as incapable, discriminated against as inferior, and treated as unwelcome interlopers in a society that took offense at their very presence is an important reminder, especially in times like these, that the very people we fear at one moment can sometimes turn out to be the source of some of our society's greatest strengths. Connecticut's most important cultural icon, and we're home to many, is the Gilded Age author and satirist Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. His historic home in Hartford is also one of the country's great historic landmarks. In Mark Twain and the Historic House Problem, I come right out and ask the question I think everyone wonders when they visit this wonderful house of this great man, but they keep to themselves, maybe because they're shy or, they don't want to call the question, but not me. I just come right out and ask it. I walk up to the nearest docent, I look her in the eye and I say, "Why can't I smell smoke?" Twain was no ordinary smoker. He was a deeply committed, unregenerate professional pipe and cigar smoker who mastered his craft at an early age and continued to improve upon it for the next 68 years. In the great age of industrial production, Twain turned himself into a literary factory, belching cigar smoke as the words poured forth. Wherever Twain went, tobacco smoke followed, and one of his greatest fears was to be where tobacco wasn't. In 1867, one day before sailing to Honolulu from British Columbia, Twain found a local wholesale tobacconist and brought 3,000 cheroots, that's little cigars, and 15 pounds of tobacco. That was about one cigar per nautical mile of the impending voyage. Later that afternoon, he went back and bought 3,000 more cheroots. That night, shortly after beginning a farewell public lecture, Twain stopped his talk in midstream. He called his manager up to the stage and he said, "Pond, I fear that cigar place may close before I get through here. So go there now and get 1,500 more of those cheroots." In the morning, Twain and his 7,500 little cigars, plus his tobacco, happily embarked for the Sandwich Isles. Now, Twain knew smoking was generally unhealthy, but he saw the habit as a kind of life vest that provided a wellness safety margin. He told the story of the doctor who visited an 80-year-old woman who was in rapidly failing health. "You must stop drinking," he told her. "I never touched a drop of alcohol in my life," she answered. "Then you must immediately give up smoking," the doctor said. "I have never, ever smoked," she replied indignantly. "Well then," the doctor said, "there's no way I can help you. You are a sinking ship with no freight to throw overboard." Oh, I still suspect most people would agree that elections in recent years, at least some of them, have left people on both sides of the political aisle with a bad taste in their mouths. That's why it might be time to revive one of our state's oldest and for centuries most time-honored traditions, the Connecticut election cake. What's an election cake? Why is it a Connecticut tradition? An election cake was a big, rich fruit, spice, and sugar yeast cake baked up in huge quantities and served to all comers during the festivities surrounding first our colonies and later our state's annual elections. The story of how election cake became a Connecticut tradition goes all the way back to the days of the Puritans. One of the things that made the Puritans so pure was that they didn't believe in the annual round of Catholic and Anglican holidays. They didn't celebrate Christmas or Easter or any of the numerous saints' days and festival days. And for them, New Year's Day came on March 26th. So no midnight kisses or dropping ball either. Now, while they rejected all of those supposedly invented occasions for mirth, they did believe that in the year 1662, Connecticut, for reasons still not exactly clear, got something that very much was worth celebrating, a royal charter from King Charles II that gave the Connecticut colony virtual independence more than a century before the American Revolution. Unlike Massachusetts and Virginia and the other royally governed American colonies, Connecticut could make its own laws and, more important, elect its own leaders without royal oversight. This right to choose their own leaders was seen from the start as fundamentally important and distinctive, worth celebrating and worth protecting. So it's not surprising that on those days when Connecticutans gathered to choose their leaders, back then election day took place in early May, these otherwise celebration-starved Puritans found reason to celebrate. And what better way to do so than with cake, and lots of it. We know Connecticutans were feasting on election day cakes well before the American Revolution because the colonial records tell us so. And if incorporating election cake into the ceremonies was an important Connecticut tradition before the American Revolution, it became even more important after, as Connecticutans themselves spread across the country to the new lands in the American West. The election cake tradition went with them. Election cake recipes appear in early cookbooks in states across the nation, and they're abundantly found in the manuscript cookbooks left by individuals in our Historical Society archives. Reading these works, a few things become crystal clear. Election cakes were central to the election ritual in many places, but especially here in Connecticut. Making an extraordinary election cake, perhaps with one's own special ingredients or a unique mixing process, became this point of honor with many homekeepers. Having a reputation for making delicious election cakes became a competitive source of status. During the 1800s, as Connecticut industrialized, welcomed people from many new nations, broke its official ties to the old Puritan church, and experienced the sectional divide that led to the American Civil War, some of Connecticut's time-honored election day traditions, riding out to meet the new governor as he made his way into the Capitol, and parading behind the state's ministers to hear an election sermon in the First Congregational Church, these fell by the wayside. But the election cake remained a steady and delicious habit. When the General Assembly decided in 1876 to change the start of its sessions from May to early January, beginning in 1877, a journalist lamenting the switch of Election Day to midwinter said, excuse me, the coming election parade of May 1876 is likely to be the last that will take place in Connecticut. Though the sermon has gone out, though the parade is going out, though the whole institution may become an element of the past, one feature of it will always remain, and that is the election cake. Lovers of it, when it is just right, excuse me, say no other cake equals it. It's only necessary to add that nobody can make it but an old Connecticut housekeeper, and that each housekeeper and her circle of adherents know she can make it better than any of her rivals. Pardon me for a second. That should help. Perhaps this is exactly the right time for the Connecticut election cake to make its comeback. At this moment, when American politics seems so divisive and so bitter, wouldn't it be great if a cohort of culinary Connecticutans, men and women equally this time, joined together to use their ovens to help remind people that democracy, the right to choose the people who rule our government, is a sweet privilege indeed. And what better way could there be to celebrate sweet democracy than to bring back the tradition of the Connecticut election cake? This is something that actually the book came back out a little bit earlier this year. And before the last election, I was promoting the idea of baking election cakes. And I'm happy to say that people all around the state took the recipe, made election cakes, and then they sent me pictures, and they've let me know that, you know, it really does seem that sitting down with somebody whose politics you don't agree with and sharing a piece of cake and reminding each other that you know, democracy really is sweet has had a good effect. I have this modernized election cake recipe in Creating Connecticut, but you know, I'm not going to make you buy the book to get the recipe or check it out of the library. If you would like one, I'm going to put my email address up shortly when I get to the end of the talk. Just email me if you'd like a copy of the recipe, and I will send one out to you, hopefully the very same day, because this idea of, you know, getting some sweetness back in politics seems to me to be very long overdue. So anyway, that's an overview of some of the 24 stories in Creating Connecticut. And I have to say, it's only a sampler. In addition, there are stories on the rough justice meted out by the British to Connecticut state hero, Nathan Hale. There's a recounting of 1935's Pull Out All the Stops 300th anniversary of Connecticut's founding. The inspiring 275-year-old story of the Lyman family's whatever it takes devotion to make and keep Lyman orchards, a thriving Connecticut farm. There's a story about the Puritans' only art form, gravestone carving. A profile of Irish-born Governor John Dempsey, the only immigrant governor of Connecticut since the colonial era, and a meditation on what it is that makes Connecticut such a unique state. And finally, there is this little story at the end that tells the story of how I got to realize a childhood dream, one that I had since I was 5 years old, of buying and owning and living in a house built by my sixth great grandfather, Eleazar Woodward. I'm happy to say that I am living in that house now. That's where I am giving this talk from tonight. And it's one of the great joys of my life that I get to live here. And I'm happy I got to share that story with you. I hope you like what you've heard enough to want to read more. And that if you'll do, you know, I'm the state historian. I feel like this is the book that more than any other I've written meets the mission that I have of helping connect people to the history of their state. It's, you know, I've been thrilled with the reaction to it, and I hope more and more people will like to read it. You can check it out from the library, and I'm thrilled for you to do that. You can order it from Amazon. I'm thrilled for you to do that. And if you would like to give a copy as a Christmas present, there, you know, I think I'm kind of an evangelist for Connecticut history. So I'd like every person in Connecticut and every person who moved away and all their friends to have this under their tree. I would be happy to send out a signed copy with an inscription, you know, to anyone you want, and do it. It would cost $25, $5 shipping and handling. And you can pay by credit card. If you go to cthistory.org, that's the state historian's website, there's a link where you can enter a credit card there. I will then email you and get the address and inscription details. Or you can email me and I'll send you how to get the book. Or you can call me and we can just do it all at once over the phone. The truth is, my big hope is that however you access it, you will read this book. Although I did get an email today from a guy named, his S. Claus, who sent all the way from the North Pole to tell me that he'd read the book and he loved it and he was going to give it to all his friends. So that was that story. Anyway, I am happy now. I thank you for your time, your attention. I am very happy to answer any questions you may have the book. And I really do. If I can figure out how to give you back the screen, Holly, I'm going to do it.
Well, I'm sure it'll come to you. So I also want to say, while you're working on that, I want to let everyone know that yes, the Granby Public Library does have a copy of Walt's book, and it is available to be checked out. Or if you have to get in line to be, put your name on the hold list, we can do that for you as well. Just a quick note, the library did close down for inside in the building browsing, but our services are still totally available online, and you can, just like Walt, I mean, it's very simple. You can either call us directly, you can email us, or you can go to the website and place your requests for the books that you want, and then we'll arrange for the curbside pickup. And just a side note, we still do take technology appointments. So if you need to come inside the building for copying, computer usage, faxing, that sort of thing, you're able to do that. But the point that I really wanted to make was I got a chance to read this book last week, and what I really liked about it was that Walt has put the short chapters in with longer chapters. So if you're not someone who has a lot of time to sit down and read for 2 hours, you can definitely get through an entire topic or a subject in a short amount of time, and then save those longer chapters for another day. And whether you borrow it from the library or decide to purchase it, I'm sure you'll enjoy it, because I thought it was really, really interesting. And the stories are kind of what you remember, but there's a little more detail in there. And it's good to have some of the backstory. So I thought that was really, really a plus about the book. So that's all I really wanted to say about plugging the book. Now we have had some questions, or actually more comments, but people are saying it's great and they love it. So that's good to hear. But here's a question for you, Walter. Do you have an interest in another book? And I know you have other books that you've written, so maybe you can talk about that. And also, if you're planning on writing another one.
Well, I am actually already at work on what I hope will be volume 2 of Creating Connecticut, which will be a second collection of Connecticut stories. And I see one of the questions is that, do I have questions about Granby in the book? There are two that are really good candidates for the next volume. One would be, of course, Old Newgate Prison and all of the stuff associated with that. And then there is the Salmon Brook Turkey Hill story of the Farmington Canal, which the Farmington Canal started at Salmon Brook. So there are not Granby stories in volume 1, although there are plenty of stories in there that involve the land, that involve Granby as a region, but they're not Granby specific. And yeah, no, yeah, no. I love when people say yeah, no, and I do it myself. Granby will be in volume 2, so read volume 1, and and if you have a preference on whether it's Old Newgate or whether it's Salmon Brook or something else, drop me an email.
So Walter, we did have another question. Thank you for answering that one. And we did have another question. Oh, here's a loaded question. And actually, we did a program about this at the Granby Public Library.
About the Notch.
So share with us what you know.
The Notch is such a great story, and I have to tell you, I recently became involved with the first governor's foot guards. And it is my hope, we're just talking about this, and it's a bit of a spoof, but one day I'm going to try, when we're not dealing with a crisis all the time, I'm going to see if I can encourage the governor to turn the foot guards loose on retaking the Notch back from Massachusetts. So, I just think it's really important that our map gets that gap tooth piece put back.
I think the Granby Horse Council, there might be some kind of cavalry thing going on if that ever happens between the Granby Horse Council and the Foot Guard.
Well, we will all work together. This is just a terrible compromise that went wrong, and I think we can undo that problem with time and screwing our courage to the sticking place.
Well, let's see. It looks like someone else wanted to share, and I'm not sure if you're seeing all these chat comments, but someone else also wanted to share, Walter, that they've ordered their copy already, and they're looking forward to it. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much. And again, I'm lucky in some ways. I am also a professor at the University of Connecticut, and I have the shortest email at the university. It is walt@uconn.edu. So if you have any ideas for Connecticut history stories, or you just want to contact me about something you heard tonight, if you remember walt@uconn.edu, I will be very happy to hear from you and to continue our conversation.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful invitation. I would take him up on that. I wouldn't let that go. Does anybody have any other questions? And if you prefer not to use the chat feature, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. We have a little bit more time left in the hour, and
You know, one of the wonderful things about Zoom world, it's probably the only unique thing about living in Zoom, is that you get these little video screen windows into people's lives. You know, I've seen so many wonderful interior decorating hints and tips over the past few months. That part is really fun. And you know, you do I think Zoom meetings are hard and they're different. It's not quite the same as in person, but you know, it's still wonderful at a time that is so troubled and dangerous that we can still get together and share things with each other. So thank you all so much for giving me the benefit of your time.
Well, Walter, thank you again for your presentation. The Granby Public Library and the Salmon Brook Historical Society, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your evening with our community. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the other folks who attended did as well. So best wishes to you. Stay safe, stay well. Everybody
Same to
be
you. Stay safe, stay well. This too shall pass. Summer is coming.
yeah, thank you. All
Can't
right,
get here
everyone.
soon enough. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for a wonderful program. All right, we'll see you at the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.